We are continuing our Bible study series of Living a Disciple's Life as we continue to go through the Gospel of Luke. Now, last time we looked at the end of chapter 13, and in this lesson, we're going to be looking at Luke chapter 14, verses 1 through 14. In this passage, Jesus is at a social banquet where he notices a problem and decides to confront that problem. And he does so by dealing with three different groups. Now, the problem that he notices and confronts is a problem that continues today, and one could make a case that the problem is actually more prevalent today, thanks in large part to social media. But the problem that he deals with is a problem that you and I probably have dealt with in our lives, and something that you may be struggling with right now. And so we're going to be looking at this text, seeing what Jesus says, and how we are to live as a disciple. And this problem deals with our attitude. And so before we get into what the lesson is, let's go ahead and read the text. One Sabbath, when he, Jesus, went to dine at the house of a ruler of the Pharisees, they were watching him carefully. And behold, there was a man before him who had dropsy. And Jesus responded to the lawyers and Pharisees, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. Then he took him and healed him and sent him away. And he said to them, "Which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out?" And they could not reply to these things. Now he told a parable to those who were invited, when he noticed how they chose the places of honor, saying to them, "When you are invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in a place of honor, lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him, and he who invited you both will come and say to you, 'Give your place to this person,' and then you will begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you are invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, 'Friend, move up higher.' Then you will be honored in the presence of all who sit at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted." He said also to the man who had invited him, "When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return, and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just." Here Jesus is at a banquet, and he notices the problem of narcissism. Now, you may be saying, "I'm not a narcissist," but another way to define narcissism, to put it simply, is selfishness. Jesus notices the problem of selfishness, and he addresses how selfishness or narcissism is expressed by looking at really two groups and one individual. And he begins by dealing with the Pharisees and lawyers. Now, the Pharisees and lawyers are groups that Jesus has dealt with many times. They have had conflicts with each other. They've had confrontations. They've had conversations. They have not gotten along. Now, there have been some exceptions to this. Nicodemus is one Pharisee who was an exception to this. He wasn't hostile to Jesus. Many believe, and I too believe, that he became a believer in Jesus. He was not hostile to Jesus. But as a whole, the Pharisees and lawyers did not like Jesus. In fact, you could argue they hated Jesus. They wanted him gone. And they watched him carefully. In fact, it says in verse 1 that they were doing that at this banquet. It says that the Pharisees were watching him carefully in verse 1, the end of verse 1. They were watching him carefully. Now, that does not mean that they were simply paying close attention to say, I wonder what he's doing. I wonder what he's up to. No. They were there looking for something wrong. They were looking for something to use against him. They were there not to simply see what he's doing, but to catch him in something. I wonder what he's going to be doing. I wonder what he's up to. Okay. Parse every single word. Look at every single thing he says. If he even twitches wrong, go after him. That was the attitude of the Pharisees. And that's what it means when it says they were watching him carefully. And so Jesus has, again, a confrontation with the Pharisees, but this time he's confronting them over their self-righteousness. And there's a specific issue that's taking place here that is the catalyst, you could say, for his confrontation over their self-righteousness. That catalyst is the healing of someone with a medical condition. Now, what the condition is, it says in verse 2 that this person has dropsy. Now, exactly what that condition is isn't the point. The point is, here we have someone who has a medical condition that Jesus is going to heal, and that this is on the Sabbath. And that's stated up front in verse 1. It says one Sabbath. So Jesus is going to heal this man on a Sabbath. But before he does, he turns to the Pharisees and scribes and the lawyers and asks them this question. He says in verse 2, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" Well, the Pharisees, their immediate reaction is probably to think, well, no, it's not legal to heal on the Sabbath. You should not heal on the Sabbath because that's working, and you should not work on the Sabbath. However, Jesus is getting to a point. He's driving home a point here. And how do they respond? They don't respond with, oh, no, you shouldn't heal on the Sabbath. No. What do they say? Verse 4, they remained silent. Why did they remain silent? Because of a couple of reasons. One, they didn't want to be exposed as self-righteous hypocrites, and they feared that was about to happen. Well, spoiler alert, yeah, that's about to happen. But they didn't want to be exposed. They wanted to maintain the air of holiness, the air of righteousness. Look at us, we are important. They wanted to maintain that. And so they kept silent so as not to injure themselves. But also they remained silent because it says that they were watching him carefully in verse 1. And so they were silent to see, what's he going to say? What's he going to do? Is he going to heal this person? Yeah, he's going to heal the person. And that's exactly what happens. They remained silent. Then he, Jesus, verse 4, Jesus took him, the guy with dropsy, and healed him and sent him away. And that's all we have about the healing, because the focus here is not the healing, but the attitude, the self-righteousness of the Pharisees and lawyers. How do we know that? Verse 5. He said to them, "Which of you, hey, righteous people, you think you're so holy and good, you holy and good people, which of you, having a son or an ox that has fallen into a well on a Sabbath day, will not immediately pull him out?" Now, he's pointing out their hypocrisy. He's exposing their self-righteousness. They act and want everybody to think that they are the paragons of virtue, that they are extremely pious people. But they would actually stop Jesus from healing someone. They would actually stop Jesus from helping someone because it's the Sabbath. But then he turns to them and says, how many of you, if your son, now he doesn't point out just simply a person, he says your son intentionally. He says, how many of you who think you're righteous, who act holy, who present yourselves as the paragons of piety, how many of you, if your child has fallen into danger, has fallen into trouble, has fallen into a place where they need help immediately, or your livestock, just your own livestock was in danger, was in need of help. On the Sabbath, how many of you would go help your child, your son, or your livestock? Well, the answer is yes, they would go do that, even on the Sabbath. But here we have a child of God. Here we have a person who needs help on the Sabbath, but they wouldn't help that person, which means they are self-righteous hypocrites. And they are selfish, wanting everybody to think of them as something they are not. They are denying the reality of who they are. Instead, putting on a facade, a mask of righteousness. And Jesus is confronting them over that. And what happens? In verse 6, they could not reply to these things. Why? Because they were not about to be exposed in their minds. They were not about to reveal themselves as self-righteous hypocrites. They were not about to be shown to be exactly what they are. Self-righteous hypocrites. Now, this is what Jesus is telling them. You should help people, even if it's on the Sabbath. Caring for others isn't limited to, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. You can care for people and help people even on Sunday Well, actually, for them it'd be Saturday. So Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. But you can even help people on Saturday. You can help people 7 days a week. You can help people every day of the week. It is not a violation of the law to help someone in need simply because it's Sabbath. No, help someone in need. Put their needs before your own needs. Put them in a place of priority. Show them that they matter by showing them love, by helping them. Just as Jesus helped this person with a medical condition on the Sabbath, the Pharisees and the lawyers should also help people on the Sabbath. They would help themselves on the Sabbath, gladly do that. But would they help others on the Sabbath? Not unless it helps them. That's self-righteousness. That's selfishness. Self-righteousness can be described this way. It is wanting others to think that we're holy or pious while denying or hiding our own sin. That is exactly what these Pharisees and lawyers were doing. They were wanting others to think that they were holy and righteous and pious while denying or hiding their own sin. And many people today, even in the name of God, continue to do this. They want everybody around them, maybe at church or in their workplace or wherever, to think that they are holy and good, to think that they are good Christians, when in fact they are wretched sinners who need to repent, who are going home and doing all kinds of awful, evil things in the eyes of God. Oh, but they are the paragons of righteousness. At least that's what they want people to think. That is self-righteousness. That is narcissism. That is a sin, and we must repent of that sin. Instead, we should help others. We should be honest before God. Be honest. And we should be willing to humbly repent. Because a disciple of Jesus on a daily basis will humbly repent of his or her sin that they have committed that day, or that week, or that moment. They will repent of their guilt. They will repent of their wretchedness and seek the forgiveness of God. That is what a disciple does. And they will help others to also be humble. They will help others in their needs, and they will put others before themselves. They won't try to present themselves as something they're not. They will do what is right before God, humbly repent of their sins, admit their failings, admit their wrongdoings, and live in the forgiveness and help others to admit their own sinfulness and repent of their sins, so that together they can walk in the righteousness of God and do so humbly, showing love for God and love for others. But that's not the only way. Self-righteousness is not the only way that narcissism or selfishness is expressed. It is also expressed through self-glorification, which Jesus confronts in verses 7 through 11. And here, he turns from the Pharisees and the lawyers to the crowd. But whereas the Pharisees and lawyers were confronted in a very direct way, here, Jesus uses a soft touch, a diplomatic way of going about it. He confronts the self-glorification of the crowd by using a parable. Now, what happens? Well, Jesus in verse 7, he says that he told a parable to those who were invited when, and this is the reason he does this, when he noticed how they chose the places of honor. Now, what was going on? Well, the host invited people to come, and when people came, they wanted to sit in the places of prestige, the places of honor. They wanted to glorify themselves with the location of where they sat. They wanted to go to the VIP seats. They wanted to go to the VIP booth. They wanted to go to the VIP table. They wanted to be noticed. They wanted to be glorified. It's all about me. They were glorifying themselves by where they chose to sit. And Jesus confronts their self-glorification and reveals to them that this is actually a form of narcissism, a form of selfishness. It's a sin. But he doesn't do so directly. He does so very gently, very diplomatically. He teaches this hard-hitting lesson by using a silk glove, you could say. And he tells them a parable. And here's the parable in verses 8 and following. He says, when you're invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not sit down in the place of honor lest someone more distinguished than you be invited by him, and he who invited you both will come to you and say, give your place to this person. And then you'll begin with shame to take the lowest place. But when you're invited, go and sit in the lowest place. So he begins by dealing with the attitude of self-glorification. And says in this parable, when you go to an event, when you go to a banquet, when you go to some social activity or something like that, when you come to something like this, don't go to the place of honor, because that leads to a problem. You see, if you go to the place of honor, you may find yourself in a difficult situation. And that situation is this. You sit in the place of honor, and then the host comes to you and says, no, you can't sit here. You have to go sit over there. And now you're going to face ridicule, you're going to face embarrassment, and the honor and the glory that you are trying to claim for yourself is now not just gone, it's destroyed. And now you don't have any glory, you have shame. So don't do that. And what Jesus does here is he's actually using a biblical lesson and also a logical argument. The logical argument that he uses is this. It is better to be given honor than to be given public shame. That's a logical given. It is better to be given honor than given public shame. And that's what he's logically using here. But he's also teaching a biblical lesson in this. He's actually going back to the Proverbs, and he's pulling from the Proverbs. He's pulling from Proverbs 12, verse 9, and Proverbs 29, verse 23. Proverbs 12:9 says this, better to be lowly and have a servant than to play the great man and lack bread. Proverbs 29:23 says this, one's pride will bring him low, but he who is lowly in spirit will obtain honor. So what Jesus is doing is he's taking these proverbs, which the crowd is very likely familiar with, and applying them to this situation and their attitude, telling them that it is better not to seek the place of honor, because if you do, you could face public shame by being asked to move to a lower place. Instead, he tells them there's a better option in verse 10. He says, but when you're invited, go and sit in the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he may say to you, friend, move up higher. Then, he says to them, then you'll be honored in the presence of all who sit at table with you. In other words, it's better to choose the lowly place and be given honor by the host than to presume honor and be shown public shame. And this is what Proverbs teach us. Humility is greater than ego. Humility is greater than pride. We should be humble. And Jesus is telling the crowd, it is better to exercise humility and take that lowly place than it is to take the honorable place. Because the honor you may think you have, the glory you may think you have achieved, may not actually be yours and may be stripped from you. Instead, if you assume the lowly place, if you have a heart that is humble, if you take the lowly position, and someone comes to you and says, and the host comes to you and says, hey, no, you matter. No, come here, take this place of honor. Then what's going to happen is you are being honored by the master, by the host. And there's actually a spiritual lesson in this that Jesus applies in verse 11. He says, for everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. This is straight out of the Proverbs in a way. This is straight out of especially Proverbs 29. One's pride will bring him low, but he who is lowly in spirit will obtain honor. This is what the proverb is saying. And the kingdom lesson in this is that God, here the host, the master, God the Father will honor those who are humble. But those who are arrogant, those who are prideful, they will get their honor in this world. But that's it. And that honor is fleeting. That honor is temporary. But the honor received from the Father in eternity lasts forever. And the humble person will receive that honor. And so we should be humble. A disciple of Jesus is a humble person. A disciple of Jesus is not arrogant, does not try to glorify himself or glorify herself. A disciple of Jesus humbly glorifies God, not himself or herself. A disciple of Jesus is humble, not self-glorifying. But not only is self-righteousness and self-glorification the ways that narcissism or selfishness is expressed, it is also expressed through self-promotion. And Jesus deals with that in the end of this passage by dealing not with the group of Pharisees and not with the group of attendees or guests. Here he turns to the host and he deals one-on-one with him. But he does so not through direct criticism, not through a parable, but he does so through a form of simply teaching, similar to what he does with his disciples. Here's a lesson that you need to learn. And so what does happen in verses 12 through 14? Jesus confronts self-promotion. And self-promotion is what this guy is quite likely doing, and we conclude that by the fact of by looking at who he's invited. It says that Jesus also said to the man who had invited him, "When you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors." Now, we don't know exactly who this guy invited to the banquet, but it is quite likely that these are the types of people or the exact people that this host invited. Why? Because when you have an honored guest, and Jesus would quite possibly be treated as an honored guest, when you have an honored guest, you invite the VIPs, you invite the people that matter, you invite the influencers, you invite the people that can really help you excel in this world. And so it's quite likely that's what this man has done. Invited the influencers of his day, the social elites of his day, the people that have prestige and power and influence in his society at the time. Why? So that this man can then also himself gain more power and prestige and influence and benefit himself in those ways. And so he's promoting himself by the people that he's inviting to this activity. He's not doing so for really the honor of Jesus. He's doing so to really help himself. And that's selfishness. That's narcissism. And so Jesus confronts this man, but he doesn't go out and say, "Hey, you're a narcissist." No. Jesus simply looks at him and says, "Here's a lesson that I want to teach you." And that lesson is this: don't invite the people with prestige and honor to a banquet. No. Instead, verse 13, "But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind." These are the people that you need to invite. Why these people? Because these people have no power. They have no prestige. They have no influence in society. They're the forgotten ones, the neglected ones, the overlooked ones, the ones that are pushed aside. These are the people that we don't want to see. These are the people that we want to hide away from human eyes because it can bring down the neighborhood. These are the people that everybody wants to just get into a shelter or get away from us because we don't want to deal with them because they can bring down property values. These are the people that cannot repay you for your kindness. There's nothing they can do for you. And so what happens? They're forgotten, neglected, ignored. And so often that happens today. We don't want those people that are distasteful being seen in society because, well, it hurts us. It affects us. It negatively impacts our livelihoods. It doesn't matter that they're humans who need help. It doesn't matter that they're humans who may be suffering. That doesn't matter. What matters is our property values, our neighborhood appearance, our aesthetics, our pleasure, our happiness. Me. It's kind of tiring. It's kind of sad. And it's downright sinful. Because it says, I matter more than them. That's what this man was doing. He was trying to promote himself by inviting the people that can help him. Instead, Jesus says, no, invite the people that can't help you. Because it's not about the power, prestige, or influence or the blessings you receive in this world. It's about loving your neighbor before yourself. It's about caring for others before yourself. It's not about promoting yourself. It's about helping others. That's what this man forgot. And Jesus teaches him that it is better to honor those who can do nothing for you. It is better to help those who cannot help you. Why? He says in verse 14, you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. How can he be blessed by them not repaying him? Well, he answers that question. Jesus gives the answer. For, here's how you'll be blessed, for you will be repaid at the resurrection of the just. Your reward, your blessing will come in eternity. Your reward, your blessing will come in the end. You will be blessed and rewarded by God. And that will come in eternity at the very end. His lesson is this. We should love others before ourselves. Jesus is reminding this host and reminding us that we should live out the second greatest commandment, which is found in Leviticus 19:18, where we learn that we should love our neighbors as ourselves. We should put our neighbors before ourselves. As Paul emphasized in Philippians 2:3, we should see others as more significant than ourselves. This is the lesson that Jesus is teaching. Love your neighbor. If you truly want to love God, love your neighbor. Even those who you look down on, even those who you may ignore, even those who cannot help you. And yet, that's not how society was working in the eyes of this man, and that's not how society works too often today. This party that Jesus went to was a party where he saw narcissism, where he saw selfishness, and it was expressed through self-righteousness. It was expressed through self-glorification and expressed through self-promotion. People were out to help themselves, to look good in and of themselves, to be honored among their peers, to be respected and become people of influence themselves. That is what Jesus was seeing. And that is a problem that we see today. And it may be something that you're struggling with. And there's various ways that selfishness or narcissism may be expressed in life today. It can be expressed through our personal lives, in our interactions and dealings with those around us. Think about your friends. And if you had to choose between helping your friends or helping yourself, what would you choose? Honestly. If your friend needed help, but you're busy doing something that you really enjoy, would you stop what you're doing to go help your friend? Or would you continue doing what pleases you? Or maybe think about your spouse or a significant other. They want to spend time with you. They want to go do something that you don't really enjoy. It's not your favorite activity, but they want to go do that. Are you willing to give up of yourself to go do that thing that you don't enjoy and maybe even detest, just to help them be happy, just to serve them and put them before yourself? Or with your kids, maybe your child comes to you and they want to do something or want to show you something, but you're too busy watching TV, you're too busy on your phone or doing whatever you want to do, and it's not convenient for you. It's not... You just don't want to. You don't have time for it. You don't want to go play that silly game with your child, at least not right now. Maybe later, because it's not good for you right now. Who are you putting first, you or your child? In your interactions with others, who do you put first, yourself or others? This is the problem that Jesus was dealing with. But also maybe at work, at your jobs. If you are working outside of the home, and you have to deal with your boss, or maybe you are the boss, but you have to go to work. And maybe at work you have to do certain things that you may not like to do, that you may not enjoy, that may not be your cup of tea. And so maybe you go to work and you just do what you have to do. You don't do anything beyond that. You do just your job, nothing more. You don't go above and beyond. You just do what you have to do because you're only there to get a paycheck to go spend that money on yourself. Who are you putting first? Others or you? Oh, it feels good to put self first. But is that the way a disciple of Jesus is to live? Well, what about at church? We also see narcissism and selfishness at church, in our attitude at church. When it comes to doing things at church, do you do things when it's convenient for you, but when it's not convenient, you decline? Who are you putting first? Too often people will serve in the church when it's beneficial to them or when they have time. They won't make time for church. They won't make time to help. No. Only when they have spare time will they help. When that happens, who are you serving? Who are you putting first, yourself or others? Who are you putting first, yourself or God? But when it comes to choosing a church, so often people look for a church that suits them. They look for a church that will please them. They look for a church that pacifies them. They look for a church that makes them feel good. They don't look for a church that they can serve in. They don't look for a church that teaches sound biblical doctrine, even if it bothers them and maybe makes them uncomfortable because they got to deal with their own sin. Oh no, they look for a church where they can be personally inspired, never really confronted with anything hard, don't really have to do much. They can just simply go, feel good, have a good time, and say, I was served. We need to quit trying to be served and start being servants. A disciple doesn't want to be served. A disciple wants to serve. But when we are looking for a church that pleases us, who are we loving first, ourselves or God? When we look at the pastor or the leader and say, you are asking me to do things or deal with things I don't want to deal with, are we telling them, I come first and my pleasure is more important than biblical truth? Oh, it's so sad. Narcissism and selfishness is abundant even in the people who claim to follow Jesus. Churches are full of narcissists. And I'm not talking about people standing up preaching from the pulpit. I'm talking about the people sitting in the pews who are there for themselves, to serve themselves. Workplaces are full of narcissists who are only there to do the job, to get the paycheck, to go please themselves. And relationships are made up of narcissists who won't really do anything unless it's convenient for them, who want that relationship because it makes them feel good. And when the relationship stops making them feel good, well, they leave that relationship. They abandon that relationship because they weren't being served. It's time we stop being narcissists in the name of God. Because so many times we will serve ourselves, then go out and tell the world, I love Jesus, when in fact we love ourselves. It kind of reminds me of the scene from 10 Things I Hate About You.
Where did you come from? Planet Loser? As opposed to planet, look at me, look at me.
Sadly, this is how many Christians are today. Look at me, look at me, look at me. We want to be seen. We want to be influencers. We want to be important. We want ourselves being happy. And if we're not happy, then, well, nothing else matters. Because we're here to serve ourselves. But a disciple isn't a narcissist. A disciple repents of his or her selfishness. A disciple repents of his or her narcissism. A disciple loves others more than self. A disciple puts others before themselves. A disciple loves God by loving others. Are you struggling with narcissism or selfishness in your life? And be honest with yourself. Are you struggling with it? It's time to repent. And it's time to be a disciple of Jesus and start loving others and putting others before ourselves. If we did that, oh, the improvements we would see in life, the joys that we would experience, and the relationships that would flourish if we would learn and begin to put others before ourselves and repent of our sin of selfishness. It's time to deal with it and time to truly love God by loving others. Well, I hope this lesson has been helpful. If it has, be sure and like, comment, subscribe, and all of that good stuff. You know how all that works here on YouTube. So until next time, hopefully these lessons are helping you. But until we meet again via video, keep knowing, showing, and sharing the gospel of Jesus.